Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. Welcome to our webinar. We'll just take a few moments for everybody to join the call. So hello from London, everybody, and welcome to our Leading Questions Live, where I'm delighted to be talking to Dominic Rochon on making digital transformation happen. Just to explain, I'm going to do a quick introduction in a moment, and then Dominic and myself, we're going to get into conversation. I'm going to be asking Dominic all about his current position, but also reflecting on his career throughout the Canadian government, and then really talking about kind of digital transformation and what that means for all of you who are listening, really, across the public sector in Canada. But it's not just Dominic and I who will be talking. It's also your opportunity, if you're listening, to put your questions to Dominic as well. And we'd like to get through as many of those as we can in the time that we have together today. So somewhere on your screen, hopefully you will see there is a Q&A button. Please use that Q&A function at any time from now on to send in your comments and your questions. And as I say, we will get through as many of those as we can. Just to introduce myself, I'm Siobhan Bonita. I'm a former UK civil servant, and I am delighted to be chairing today's conversation on behalf of Global Government Forum that works with civil servants all around the world. So in terms of our brilliant guest today, Dominic Rochon. Hello, Dominic. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Siobhan. Very nice to
Good.
be here.
Fantastic. So Dominic, please do interrupt me if I've got any of this wrong, but you are currently the Chief Information Officer for Canada. You sit in the Treasury Board Secretariat in Canada. And before that, you were the Associate Deputy Minister at Transport Canada. You also worked as the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister for National Security and Cyber Security in Public Safety Canada. And you've held senior roles across lots of other kind of organisations and central agencies, including in the Privy Council office and with the Communications Security Establishment. So you have that real breadth, I think, across the Canadian government. And we'll come on to that in a moment, because I'm interested in how you found working across all those different kind of areas, policy areas and professions. But I guess we should start off with your current position. So as Deputy Minister and Chief Information Officer of Canada, can you tell me a little bit about how would you describe your role and what is it that you do as the CIO?
Certainly. And I must say, I guess I've reached that point in my career where an introduction like that makes me feel old in terms of all of the various things that I've been through, but nevertheless, rather neat to reflect on the fact that I have indeed spent some time in a vast array of different departments and agencies, which makes me someone who's been in the federal public service for a long period of time. I had the privilege of being appointed to this position earlier this year in February. And as you pointed out, the Chief Information Officer for the federal government resides within a central agency, which is the Treasury Board Secretariat. And as a result, a central agency such as the Treasury Board Secretariat plays a crucial coordinating function for the government when it comes to promoting coherence across programs and services, but also in establishing administrative policies that direct the behavior of departments and agencies on a wide range of issues. So as the CIO, I set policies and strategic direction when it comes to digital transformation, when it comes to service delivery, when it comes to security, when it comes to information management and information technology, when it comes to access to information, and when it comes to privacy in the Canadian public service. So it's a bit of a misnomer. Typically, people think CIO and they go directly to you're responsible for technology. But I also have security, privacy, information management, data management, cybersecurity. There's a whole array of things that fall
Yeah.
under my responsibility. The role itself is defined in a policy on service and digital, and that particular policy gives me a broad mandate across several key areas. This includes shaping enterprise-wide priorities around service design and delivery, around technology, around data management, around cybersecurity, and around talent development as well, particularly as it pertains to digital skills.
Mm.
I also provide governance advice to the Secretary of the Treasury Board and the President of the Treasury Board, helping guide decisions in the areas I mentioned before and the use of emerging technologies. So I'm responsible for establishing standards, overseeing planning, reporting, and performance measurement. And I also happen to be the functional head of the federal CIO community, and I lead our digital security and privacy communities across the federal public service. My team and I work closely with departments and agencies to advance various federal digital priorities, from modernizing our legacy technology systems to ensuring that our digital services are secure, efficient, and user-focused. And of course, we work closely with domestic and international partners and stakeholders to mutually collaborate on areas of shared interest. So that's quite a mouthful,
Wow.
but in a nutshell, how I would describe what I inherited when I arrived here on February 12th earlier this year.
I mean, that is a daunting remit. I mean, it's huge what you've described there. It's certainly broader than I had imagined. As you say, I think a lot of people would think it was much more narrowly focused on the technology side of things. That's given me so many questions already I want to ask you. But one thing, I mean, you said that you took up this position in February, is that right? So it's still
That's correct.
relatively new. How did you kind of, what were your first impressions coming in? Because digital transformation is so crucial now, I think, to governments around the world. All of them are kind of digitalizing so that they can meet a lot of the challenges that they are facing. What did you think when you took on this position? Was it what you expected? Were there any surprises?
So my first impression was exactly the same one that you just had, which was, my goodness, the remit is a lot broader than one would have thought. That being said, I've spent the better part of the first 8 months discovering a bit of the culture, trying to establish some stability, and setting a clear direction for our priorities moving forward. Now, why do I say that? Here in Canada, I think it would be fair to say that the digital community within the federal government is not particularly well perceived by Canadians. Why? Because over the past decade, if not a little bit longer, we've had a few famous failures when it comes to technology. We've had issues with, for example, our pay system. It's
Hmm.
not a surprise. It's been something that's been plaguing us and that we've been working at. And in fact, I had a hand in at one point in one of my stops in my career, and I continue to oversee that. Um, We've had some issues with during the pandemic, a particular application and issues with IT procurement. So there's been some challenges in our environment with regard to how we're perceived in government as being able to deliver on IT solutions. And of course, there's also a backdrop post-pandemic of refocused government spending. So
Hmm.
we are in a certain economic times now where austerity is going to be the name of the game. So we have challenges of perception where we need to re-examine, I think, our policy risks and our oversight. We've got refocused government spending, and we've also got a renewal of our values and ethics. The
Hmm.
clerk of the Privy Council, which is the head of our public service, is making a concerted effort to review our values and ethics. And I think that also applies with regard to how we deliver on digital. So in terms of priorities, I did inherit a very good document that is referred to as the Government of Canada's Digital Ambition. My predecessor put that in place about, I think it was released in 2022. So we're coming up to the 3-year mark next year of that original strategy's release. And we're in the process of updating that ambition. And what I will say is, in terms of how I'm approaching things, I'm looking at it, I'm trying to simplify things in order for the breadth of my responsibilities and my ability to collaborate with all of the different functional communities across the federal public service. And we're talking 400,000 people, if not more.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm trying to simplify that. And my approach has been one where I look at things through 3 lenses: a policy lens, a technology lens, and a people lens. The policy lens is one that is fairly obvious. I have 4 key policies: one on digital and services, one on government security, one on privacy protection, and one on access to information. But beneath those policies, we put in place direction, guidelines, supports, tools for all public servants in order to understand how to work within those functional areas. And I can talk about the success that we've had. We've put in place just in my 8 months, and not simply under me, because I have amazing teams that have been pulling this together over a period of time. But we have a trust and transparency strategy that sets out a whole of government blueprint to strengthen public trust in federal institutions. We've released an enterprise cybersecurity strategy. We can't get through a digital conversation these days without talking about artificial intelligence. We're putting together an artificial intelligence strategy. So on the policy side, that is really the bread and butter, I would argue, of the CIO position in a central agency. There are partnerships that are to be had with different departments and agencies that are much more involved in the operations of technology. And we'll speak about, I think, some of those collaborations and the teamwork that is required a little bit later. So that's policy. On the technology side, obviously, I have a role to play in terms of overseeing major transformation projects. I spoke about our HR and pay solution that is being led out of Public Services and Procurement Canada. We're still in the throes of delivering on that solution. It's been a very long journey, but we think we have the project back on the rails. There's a business delivery modernization project that we're doing at Employment and Social Development Canada. We have a digital platform modernization program at Immigration. So these huge transformational projects are replacing legacy systems with new ways of delivering services. And we have a role to play with regard to oversight of that. But we also have a role to play in terms of introducing enterprise-wide solutions and trying to put that in place. And prioritizing the limited amount of resources into which digital transformation do we want to invest in first or primarily.
Right.
Lastly, I just want to say is on the people side. So what people might not realize is that we have inherited a role in terms of supporting digital talent. And that's not just recruitment, retention, but it can also mean training and career management for the digital workforce. And I'd like to have a vision to actually professionalize that workforce, because we don't have like in the financial world, where chief financial officers have to get certifications and have to keep those certifications up to date. In the federal government, that is not the case for the digital world. And so I'd like to explore how we get to that, particularly given how fast technology is evolving. What are the key tenets that we need to have? We've come up with certain competencies that we've introduced, digital competencies that we're going to be rolling out. So all this to say, we're going to be updating our digital ambition, and they're going to be following these 3 priorities of people, technology, and policy, and hopefully providing a frame for my colleagues across different departments and agencies.
Well, I mean, that raises so many questions with me. I want to pick up on what you said about people there, because so you mentioned they're wanting to professionalize, and you said earlier that you sit as head of the profession, the CIO, kind of you sit above the heads of the CIO network. So a couple of things strike me. How difficult is it? Because this comes up when we're doing events and conferences and webinars with civil services around the world, to recruit good talent in the first place when you're kind of in competition with the private sector. But I think there's a deeper issue here. What you were saying as well is that regardless of what profession you're in, everybody's going to have some kind of digital literacy. I think they're going to need to require some kind of digital literacy going forward, because that's the world that we are now in. So again, do you have plans then for kind of training for everybody across the public sector? How is that going to work? And can people who, it's interesting, your background, you didn't start in the technology position. So do you see kind of people being able to move then into more technology focused roles, even if they haven't yet done that?
So I would argue I'm not someone who specifically, I don't have an engineering ring. I haven't been working in technology my whole career. I've been around technology, and yet here I find myself in the position of Deputy Minister and CIO for the federal government. Your question is a complicated one, and I don't want to give the impression that somehow from where I sit, I can solve this issue or set ourselves down the path of solving the issue on my own. So let me take your question and sort of peel back some of the layers that you mentioned. First of all, absolutely there needs to be digital literacy that encompasses everyone. So I look at the digital workforce in the federal government. We have about 25 to 30,000 employees that would consider themselves digital workers
Mhm.
that have hands on keyboards and are doing things that are very technology focused or data strategy focused, things of that nature. But there's a much broader workforce. Luckily, we have a Canada School of Public Service with a digital academy that
Yeah.
provides starting to introduce mandatory courses, but has a vast array of ways, particularly online, to educate and increase awareness. They've just got a suite of things now on artificial intelligence, for example. They've put in place a mandatory course for cybersecurity. Um, but so they have a role to play. We have different players that are responsible for recruiting the next generation of public servants, and we're collaborating with them. But we have a dedicated team ourselves that have introduced a digital platform and are trying to manage the digital skills in such a way as to better understand. And I mentioned earlier some of the challenges we're having with regard to IT procurement, and in
Mm.
particular, the idea that someone who's trying to deliver on a particular project, when is it appropriate to reach out to the private sector and partner with the private sector who has certain
Yeah.
expertise? And when do we need to be developing that expertise internally?
Yeah.
So I think it would be fair to say that the federal government will never be leading edge, bleeding edge on all technology. The private sector can afford to be that. We cannot. That's not to say that we have to lag behind, but it
Yeah.
does mean that inevitably we're going to have to partner.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have to be investing in our digital workers and making sure that we are honing those skills and professionalizing some of those skills as well. So how to do that at the speed of at which technology is evolving is an incredibly challenging thing. And it's going to be a team game, and it's understanding the roles and responsibilities of the different players in the federal government in order to deliver on that.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. There's so much to unpick there again. I mean, you did mention, I want to come back because I noted this down in particular. You mentioned one of the other things that you're responsible for is the modernizing of legacy systems. In a
Indeed.
moment, I'm going to come on. We've had a question already in about this, but um, do you think, because I guess part of your role as the CIO is helping people across departments as they look to modernize their systems to do it in the most kind of effective and efficient way. Do you think departments and teams are getting better at fundamentally rethinking the way they modernize their system? So they're not still modernizing, but within a silo, that rather they're standing back and looking at, can we take this opportunity as we modernize our systems to create systems that are more interoperable, that work in a different way, so that ultimately the service to the customer will be a more seamless service?
So again, it's amazing how you touch on any topic and about five or six other ones emerge. So
Yeah.
let me try and tackle that this way. First of all, improving interactions with citizens. Um, that's that is something that I think is primordial. It's ultimately the outcome that we have, right? As public servants, we want to serve Canadians and making sure that we're offering them um, an ability to interact with us now digitally, and making sure that that is a powerful connection is a frontier that we're trying to cross.
Mm.
Now, how to get there, to your point, you need to be able to think through how to do that, and it's as much a change management
Mm.
effort as it is a technology effort from my perspective,
Mm.
because you have the culture of citizens, but you also have the culture of the people who have been delivering those services through their previous means,
Yeah.
and getting them to give up their traditional way of delivering that service and adopt new technology is not obvious.
Yeah.
So there's a whole challenge with regard to putting that together. And I mentioned, some of the biggest projects that we have underway. Old age security, employment insurance benefits, some of our immigration platform, how we're interacting with Canadians, how we're interacting with our public service on paying them with HR and pay. These are huge transformation projects. And where are we at on that? I would say different departments and agencies are at different levels of maturity. And what I think my role is to be a leader in the community, because every department and agency will have a chief technology officer, a chief digital officer, a chief information officer, making sure that we understand what the conditions need to be in order to be successful. We talked about legacy systems, for example. If you can't get out of the technical debt that your department has accumulated over time, you're never going to get
Yeah.
to that transformation. But similarly, do you have a data strategy? If you actually don't understand the type of data that you have, and that you've cleaned that up and that it's powerful, forget about trying to adopt artificial intelligence, for example. So it's a question of getting a better understanding of the lay of the land, making sure that each department and agency understands where they fit and what the path is in order to be able to get to some of these transformation projects.
Thanks, Dominic. If it's all right with you, I mean, I've got lots of other
Yes,
questions,
please
but we've
take
got,
some of the questions
yeah,
from
we've got
our.
lots
Yeah.
of great. I love our audiences because they're already sending in lots of really interesting questions. So Ahmed, um, picking up, I think, on what you've just covered there, has said, given that there's a lack of collaboration among Government of Canada departments, and I would add, this is not just a Canadian issue, we're hearing this from all countries that we work with in GGF. Is this a challenge for AI deployment? So, what measures have been implemented to address this, to try and increase collaboration? And I would say it's the same you were saying with data, for example, sharing data across
Mhm.
departments, and you talking about this being more of a change management issue than anything else. So, what would you say to Ahmed in terms of how do you help with collaboration across departments?
So again, I'll go back to my role, and as I described it, as a central agency and primarily a policy role. People will look at me as the pinnacle of bureaucracy. Oh my goodness, here he is putting in place rules that we have to follow, and that is a barrier to innovation. I'm being facetious here, but on purpose. The truth of the matter is we need rules. You can't just venture into innovative and transformative projects without understanding that there are security concerns, there are
Mhm.
privacy concerns, there are accessibility concerns. So you need these rules. On
Yeah.
artificial intelligence in particular, we have already started putting in place guardrails. For example, we put in place as far back as 2019 a directive on automated decision making. What does that do? It means that if you're taking on AI or automated decision-making projects where a computer essentially will ultimately make decisions, you have to do an algorithmic impact assessment to make
Mhm.
sure that you understand that there's no bias with regard to how those decisions are ultimately going to be made if you don't have a human in the equation.
Yeah.
Um, we've put together a guide for the use of generative AI, because we're not naive in realizing that now generative AI, be it Copilot, be it ChatGPT, these things are now available on everyone's phones. Everyone is coming to the public service and using it. So
Mm.
can they use ChatGPT to write a briefing note? Can they use Copilot to manage their day-to-day operations? Absolutely.
Mm.
What is this gonna mean in terms of translation? Here in Canada, we have Official Languages Act that requires us to offer services in both official languages. Is this going to make things easier given the power of AI with regard to translation?
Mm.
So first and foremost, in order to help with collaborating across departments and agencies, I think those guidelines need to be put in place. And we've done that in terms of guardrails. We've now embarked on an AI strategy, and we're in the process of consulting on that. The AI strategy is going to not just say we need to be mindful of the guardrails, but the strategy is going to say you can't miss the boat. Because there are potential pratfalls with the use of AI, it doesn't mean that you can ignore it and that you can't
Yeah.
be taking it on. You have to. So, all this to say, in terms of collaboration, I think there is the need for central guidance, but at the same time, there is the need for pilot projects and departments and agencies to be able to incubate and understand what are the things that we're trying to do.
Mm.
And when there is a solution that is discovered that is useful, it needs to be then scalable and applied across different departments and agencies. So we need to distinguish between those things. For example, I'll use access to information, which is a particular rule that we have here in Canada. I'm sure you have something similar in the UK,
Mhm.
whereby any citizen can request access to information from a department or agency. So every department or agency has to have a way of tracking information and providing that information. There are solutions that can be found that can be enterprise wide, so that once someone discovers what that solution is, it can be applied across different departments and agencies. That's a form of collaboration that we need to be
Yeah.
able to propagate.
Yeah. I mean, thank you. I think you've answered. So the other question that came in on, we're getting several on AI. So Anson had asked, AI is built through training on data. How is the government ensuring its use of AI preserves privacy of data? But I think you mentioned that in terms of your strategy and making sure there are guardrails in place. So I think we've already answered that one. And then Rick Stock has said, Canada was the first nation to publish a national AI strategy in 2017. Where do you now see the strongest potential use for AI in government? I think that's a really good question, because do you see it as in AI will help with our own internal operations in government, so removing the need for those kind of day-to-day routine tasks for people?
Mhm.
Or do you see it more in delivering services to the public, that's where AI is going to be of most use?
I think it's both. I think the first category is probably easier in terms of providing a tool like we have with our wonderful smartphones. You
Yeah,
know, go back 20 years, there were no smartphones, and yet now we have smartphones. Or the use of the internet. You know,
yeah.
you introduce you introduce the internet in the day-to-day activities of a public servant. It came with challenges, it came with misuse, so you had to put in place some guidelines, but you couldn't ignore the fact that people were going to go on the internet and Google things or search things in order to help them advance whatever it is they were doing. So similarly, AI has a whole bunch of usages that are going to facilitate and no doubt render certain activities obsolete, and they'll be replaced by the use of these powerful tools. A little bit easier to put in place because everyone will be using them, and there'll have to be a few guardrails to make sure that people are transparent about where these tools are being used. But otherwise, I think that is an easier proposition than ultimately start using AI to deliver services to Canadians. Why? Because there are significant impacts that can occur when you are relying on machine decision making to deliver a particular service. And if there's a bias that comes into play, there are much more dire consequences in that scenario. So I think we have to be that much more careful. I would also say that we're really only scratching the surface of generative AI. It's exploded. I think there isn't a week that goes by now that there isn't a conference where someone isn't talking about the impact of AI, and the jury's still out. I think it's going to be challenging, but we need to make sure that we don't miss the boat. And I think in Canada, we've been thinking about this, and we've built an ecosystem. We have some of the foremost leading researchers in the area. We have AI institutes in three different cities across the country, and we've the federal government is definitely invested in that particular ecosystem. And so it's going to be a question of making sure from a federal public service that we adopt this at the same speed as the rest of society is adopting it.
Mm. Thanks, Dominic. So many good questions coming in. There is one from Christopher Ford who has said, how can managers support and make space for their employees to explore new tools and digital transformation opportunities? So how is the Treasury Board Secretariat supporting digital transformation government-wide? I should have said, this conversation is happening in the run-up to a large conference that you'll be talking at in Ottawa, so on the 21st of October, which is all about digitalization of kind of government, of our own operations and of service delivery, and it's called Accelerate Gov. You will be speaking there, Dominic. We would like to encourage everybody to attend from across Canada. I guess that's an example of where there are these opportunities for people to come and learn about some of the latest kind of initiatives. So can you just give us a flavour of what you'll be talking about there and why you think it'd be helpful for everyone who possibly can to attend that event?
Well, yes. I mean, I'll state the obvious. You've already stated it, but I think one of the biggest opportunities with Accelerate Gov is the chance to share best practices in person and learn from other jurisdictions around the world about what we're doing there. digital transformation isn't something that any one department or country can do in isolation. It requires a collaborative approach. And by bringing together many different international perspectives, we can break down silos and find new ways to work together on things like improving service delivery, evolving cyber threats, the use of AI in the public sector. So there's such a wide breadth of topics, I think, on the agenda. I was looking at it the other day. I think using data to drive better services, indigenous data sovereignty, building a culture that can drive government transformation. There's just going to be an enormous amount of things to dive into. And the conference is really the ideal space to push those conversations forward on a broad range of topics. Truth be told, I'm going to be really proud to be able to talk about some of the success stories that Canadian officials will be able to showcase and the work that we've done over the past year. I mentioned earlier that we have a digital ambition. Every year we produce a digital ambition year in review. So what were our successes? And we're about to release the latest one. And I've already mentioned some examples, I think, earlier, the enterprise cybersecurity strategy, the trust and transparency strategy, but departments and agencies are also introducing chatbots and things of that nature to help farmers and things of that. So lots of things that have been going on. We've recently released, for example, an application hosting strategy, which is our latest. We had a cloud first, rather naive strategy, I would say. We moved to cloud smart. We've now called it an application hosting strategy. So there are lots of things where we're going to be able to compare notes. And I think that is the ideal place to do that. If I could just maybe make a segue to, I think what you said was Christopher Ford's question, if I got the name right. You know, these are places where you can ask that very question. How are different jurisdictions managing to incubate and come up with innovative ideas, and then how do you then bring those to scale and have them apply to the broader public service? In order, so come to Accelerate Gov, have that conversation, learn about that, discover some of the things that are happening, but at the same time, just from a federal government perspective here in Canada, we're hoping to be able to describe the landscape, understand that each department and agency has a digital culture that ultimately will be able to prioritize how much resources do we have. Do we have the right digital skills and workforce? Have we invested in that? And then what is our current legacy systems situation? What is our technical debt? And where are the things that we can actually achieve outcomes? How are we partnering with our policy colleagues and our operation colleagues to figure out where can we have the biggest bang for our buck? And then ultimately come up with some of those solutions. Where I came from, transport, was a great example where that very much existed. And I found that the CIO there or the CDO, she's a chief digital officer, she was actually creating the appropriate environment in order to be able to have that flourish.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks. So all these opportunities to have these conversations, really, really important. And just to say to everybody listening, we have sent a link out on the, you should have received that. And I think we'll be emailing that as well to Accelerate Gov if you would like to register for that. But I'm going to take two very quick questions, Dominic, and then come back to a couple of questions that I had myself. But I think these are quite specific questions, not my area of expertise, not sitting in Canada, but one is from Ava, who has said, speaking of modernizing our legacy systems and ensuring that everything's up to date, do you have any update on the Government of Canada rolling out internal usage of password managers? Does that mean anything to you?
Yes, but that is very into the weeds. So I wouldn't have an update to provide today, unfortunately.
No problem. We will see if we can get something to you, Ava, in time for Accelerate Gov. And the other one was from Adam Ashton. Let me just see, that one's gone up. So Adam has said, I've used ICID's ICS program several times now. I think it's a fantastic initiative in promoting the awareness and adoption of technology. Is there a likelihood this program will grow while other funding is shrinking across the GOC? Adam, are you familiar with those acronyms, Dominic, or would you like Adam to
I am.
No,
I'm familiar. It's a good question. And it's an illustration of, in the absence of a horizontal enterprise-wide approach each department and agency has developed their own expertise and has invested their own amount of resources, time, and effort in order to be able to promote innovation and I would say that, as I mentioned right from the outset, we're moving into more austere times. There's going to be less there are going to be less resources available to us than more in the foreseeable future, given the economic situation. And as a result, we're going to have to be better at prioritizing where we're investing and where we're dedicating certain resources. So when we find a program like the ICS program that he mentioned at our Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Department, I said, um, we need to trumpet that, and we need to then bring it at scale, as I was saying earlier. So it's a question of making sure that the community itself understands where these pockets of successes exist and bringing them to the fore and making sure that they're repeatable instead of having each individual department and agency delve into their own separate cultures and try
Mm.
to have their own siloed arms race, if I could put it that way.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. And I didn't do justice, so he did put the acronyms, he did expand them actually in a further comment. So thank you for doing that. I want to come back to a couple more general questions, and then I'll go back to the audience as well, because we've still got lots of great questions coming in. But just because you are relatively still new in your position, and this might be the first time that people are kind of hearing from you in detail. So just to get a sense of kind of more of who you are, Dominic. So I said
Mhm.
you had these roles across different professions, and you yourself said you didn't see yourself, very much at the start in a technology role. Um, I'm just curious because I asked this to a lot of the leaders of public sector organizations that I speak to. What motivated you in the first place to join kind of the public sector, and what's kept you there throughout the years?
So I happen to come from a family of public servants. My grandfather on my father's side was a career public servant. My father was a career diplomat. So well, from a young age, I moved around the world. I was very fortunate to live in Costa Rica and Geneva, Switzerland, and London, England, and Buenos Aires, Argentina. All the while, understanding from a very young age, the reason why I was moving and being introduced to these different cultures is because my father represented the federal government. I also have an uncle that was very high up in government and had the benefit of working across different departments and agencies. And in watching them and having the privilege of having them be mentors for me, and they continue to be mentors to this day, I was introduced to the values of being a public servant. So when I joined, I was fortunate enough to join in central agency type departments and agencies where I got a broad view of the expanse that is the federal public service. I mean, you can work today on something that is going to go to the moon if you work for the space
Mm,
agency, the Canadian Space Agency, or you can work on agriculture, or you can work on. I worked at the Department of Transport, where you're working on the policies that are going to impact the use of ferries in our eastern provinces, or high-speed rail, or passenger rights for people that are traveling. There is no end to the impact that you can actually have on Canadians. And so the beauty of being in the public service is that you can reinvent yourself, which is what I've done
mm,
every 3 or 4 years. The trick, of course, is to really get a sense of how government works, understanding that there are policy jobs, there are operational jobs, there are functional jobs. You could work in finance or human resources or legal or audit and evaluation, or indeed IT.
mm,
And all of these things come together to ultimately achieve one outcome, which is better service and better things for Canadians, which I think is a laudable thing to do. And it exposes you to the vast corners of our country. I've had the privilege of being able to travel to all the different provinces and territories. You get a sense of how our country is incredibly diverse, and different Canadians require different things depending on where they live. Just think about people who live in our north, understanding our history. So all these things really have allowed me to sort of fall in love and make my way, meandering through the various different departments and agencies that I've had a privilege of working at.
I love that answer because at the heart of all of that, as you say, it's making the world a better place for people, for citizens. But I like the way that you've said you don't have to stay within one strand. Like you've done all of these different things, and actually, I think for a lot of people, they maybe don't think they can do that, but you've kind of demonstrated that you can move across in lots of different ways, whether it's geographically or across different functional areas or professions, which is fantastic. Coming back to the kind of where you find yourself now, though, really heading up this very topical, very important kind of digital transformation journey that a lot of governments are on, not just in Canada. I was going to ask you, what do you think is the top priority when it comes to digital modernisation? But I want to link that to two questions that have come in because I think they're very related, which is, so Kellen Greenberg has said, what do you think is the most important question that needs to be answered as part of the Government of Canada's digital transformation agenda? So I think that's very similar to my question. And then I like this one. Jimmy Rico said, thanks for hosting this interesting session. How do you measure impact and value behind the investments made on digital transformation? So I guess it's a different way of asking that. What's the priority? I guess the other way of asking it is where do you get the most sort of bang for your buck in terms of digital transformation?
Right. So you've covered
Yeah,
a lot of ground. I don't
very
even know where to
small
start.
questions, these.
Um, yes, priorities being what they are, services to Canadians. How do we improve the digital experience? That is, I would say, number one. We've here in Canada, we've a year ago named a new minister for services, and we actually transferred the Canadian Digital Services, which used to be a team within the Office of the Chief Information Officer here. They've moved over to our Employment and Social Development Canada department to put an emphasis on delivering on services. So the priority is clearly there. How to achieve that is going to be very much a team game. It's not going to be achieved just by that particular department. We have a role to play in terms of monitoring and well, setting the policies, setting the rule set, having them deliver, but then having us check on the performance. So how do you check in with citizens? Are they getting their passports? How long is it taking them to get their passports? How are we measuring success? Are they able to do so? And are they able to do so securely? Are they able to do so respecting privacy? Are they able to do so with regard to accessibility and things of that nature? So number one priority, I would say, is providing services to Canadians in a digital way. And so there's a whole host of things that go into that. I would say not far behind that, you cannot have a conversation about digital transformation or anything digital, frankly, without talking about cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Cybersecurity continues to be a massive, massive challenge. And dare I fearmonger by saying that with the advent of potential quantum computer, that would be a game changer and cause us even more concern. But before we get to that, cybersecurity and the challenges with ransomware and things that we see on a daily basis, sadly, speaks to how you could design the most amazing way of interacting with Canadians, but it could all come crumbling down if you don't have an appropriate way of safeguarding that through cybersecurity. So cybersecurity remains very top of mind. And then I would argue that after those two priorities, underneath it, you want to be able to deliver on transformation. You want to get out of your technical debt situation. So how do you modernize? At the same time, you can't ignore AI. So how are you adopting AI? So these are all sort of the pieces
Mm.
that fall under the technology stream underneath those top two priorities. I'm just trying to get to the additional question that you fit in at the end, where you were talking about how does one measure impact, and how therefore do you decide? When you work in government, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, you have to understand how government works. You have a government of the day. that gets voted in, and ultimately your political masters have the opportunity to set the agenda and decide what is a priority. Um, do we want to put in place new legislation around firearms, which is what we're doing here in Canada? And will that entail having to have citizens return their guns? And how do we put in place a technological solution to help us collect those now restricted firearms and destroy them? That is a priority of the government that you cannot say, no, you know what? We're not interested in doing that because this other thing takes a priority. So the government of the day, whoever is voted into office, ultimately has a role of setting the agenda. And so there are things that you're absolutely going to have to prioritize. At the same time, there are certain obvious things that are falling apart because the legacy system is just hanging on. You've put it together on shoestring and bubble gum, and it's come to a point where it's all going to come crashing down if you actually don't modernize it. So you have to prioritize there. And sometimes because you've neglected to invest in that area, it could be billions of dollars before you ultimately are able to transform that piece. And then so in terms of prioritizing, you have to take these things into consideration. And then, of course, you've also got just the way that we do business and the whole back office suite of things that you need to do. I mentioned our HR and pay, but that's just one area in terms of being able to pay public servants accurately and on time. You also have financial systems that you need to be keeping up to speed. You've got a whole host of other things that are behind the scenes, people don't think about, but that remain priorities. So the way that I describe this, or that I'd like to get to a point where I sit down with a deputy minister who isn't necessarily doesn't necessarily have a technological background. And the way that I describe it, I use a silly analogy, but it's as though when you buy a house, you realize that you're now a new house owner and that you have to put investment in paying off your mortgage. But you're going to be reminded very quickly that you also have utility bills. You have to pay for water and electricity. And don't forget, though, that you're also going to have to put money aside because ultimately your roof is going to be need of replacement, and you're going to need a new furnace at some point. And so typically when a deputy minister is looking at his department, the deputy minister, if I use the house analogy, is going to say, I want to put in a new pool, or I want to put in a new extension to the house. And I want to be in a place to say, well, let's look at what your digital environment actually is. You might have a crack in your foundation. You might want to worry about that, or you don't have running water. So before you start talking about a pool, you need to get your house in order, so to speak. So what I would like to get to, given my role, is at a place where I'm providing advice and guidance, and I'm showcasing what is the state of each department and agency in terms of their technology. Have they dealt with their technology debt? Do they have a data strategy? Do they have the digital skills in their departments to be able to deliver on some of the things that they want to do? Do they fully understand the outcomes that they want to achieve in terms of their interaction and their digital journey that they need to go on? And once you get that down, then you can start measuring, okay, here's where you're at, here's where you want to go. What level of investment is required? If we prioritize that, how are we going to measure the impact and the success of that? And that needs to be a collective understanding and conversation that you can have. So I can't just come up with that on my own, sitting in my office at a central agency. I need to make sure, and when I say me, I mean the people, my whole team. We need to get out there and partner with different departments and agencies and make sure that there's a common understanding on how we achieve that.
Really interesting. So like everybody's going to have a kind of digital stock take almost before you do the next thing, understanding if you've got the foundations in place, which is really important. And I think that challenge, given limited resources, going back to the question is, how do you know where to invest and where you're going to get the most back, is one that's facing so many civil servants in Canada and around the world. There are so many strands we could take this conversation down, but I'm just looking at the time. I can't believe how quickly this conversation is gone. And there are a couple of questions about partnering with the private sector, which I'd like to take, if that's all right with you. So, and I think
Certainly.
they're in two different directions. So one has come in from Louise, and her question is more about the private sector is pioneering in certain areas and will be providing, she mentions NICT. Is it fair to say then, she says, that Canadian citizens living in, for example, cities that house these kind of technology hubs are going to benefit more, and therefore we'll see a growing social digital divide when it comes to accessing public services? So is there something in the way you're partnering with the private sector that might lead to a new group of digitally excluded people?
That's a great question, and it's a topic that's come up on many fronts. And here in Canada, we live in a federation. And the reason I mention that is before you even start talking about partnering with the private sector, you have to understand the partnership that we need to have with our provincial governments.
Yeah.
Our provincial governments are introducing, they have responsibilities for example, driver's licenses and things of that nature. So as they go on their digital journey in terms of looking to offer the ability to have an identification card provided to the citizens of a particular province, or the use of digital wallet, for example. Every province and territory are at different states of maturity as well in terms of their digital journey. And as a federal public service, as we start introducing these things, we don't want to duplicate, or worse yet, we don't want to offer something that won't be valid in a particular province because they've set things up differently. So there's a responsibility now that we have where we have to actually sit down, and we have, with our provinces and territories, and they too have their own governments and their own CIOs and their own partnerships, and come up with a solution that ultimately is going to serve Canadians the best.
Mm.
I mentioned our Employment and Social Development Canada, ESDC. That department now has our Canadian Digital Services, who are working on digital identity. And digital identity is such an important concept, and something that we haven't been able to crack. And if we crack it, we're going to need to do it in tandem with our provinces and territories, so that we have one common way for Canadians to interact with their government. And wouldn't it even be better if we went one step further and actually got municipal governments on board? To that end, though, once you do that, you're starting to put in place a particular expectation on the Canadian citizen that, you used to be able, and not unlike the revolution that the banking industry went through, where people wanted to pay their bills, and so they went into a bank and they paid their bills at a bank teller,
Yeah.
until such time as someone illustrated that they could use their iPad or their phone, and it would happen almost seamlessly. People were afraid about the security around that, and things of that nature. But over time, we've seen the revolution take hold. Similarly, we have to go through a similar path with our citizens. And yes, at the end of the day, we need to partner with private sector who are offering these things. So if you're able to book a ticket to go see a movie, or you to dine at your favorite restaurant, you're doing all of that online, and that becomes your expectation.
Mm.
The same thing should be applicable when you're interacting with the federal government to renew your fishing license or something of that nature. So we need to keep up the speed. So we're already a little bit in that situation where we're falling somewhat behind, and we need to keep a pace with what citizens' expectations are.
Mm. Thanks, Dominic. And I guess as you do that, as you're saying, being really mindful that not everybody is coming on that journey. So we need to make sure that they have access to the services as well, in future.
Well, another
This,
point, if I could just make one other connection, of course, Accelerate Gov, being able to create all of this in Canada and then have people, go vacation abroad and not have access to these services is also an issue. So Accelerate Gov is an opportunity to also get a sense of what are other jurisdictions, how far ahead are the UK in terms of offering these types of services to their citizens, and getting a better understanding of where we fit and how other people are doing and how we're going to actually interact internationally, which is an even bigger problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether crossing borders and whether those systems will talk to each other, really interesting. But also, there are countries like India where we've done some interesting events with them where they're allowing grandchildren to access digital services on behalf of their grandparents who are struggling with the kind of digital technology. So there's all these different creative approaches that we can all learn from, I think, when we have these events where we all come together. Um, Dominic, this will be the last question, I think, because we have gone through so many. Thank you to the audience for sending in so many great questions. This one has come in from Mohammed Shaheen, who has said, I'm interested in understanding a bit more your strategy regarding partnerships with the private sector, but this is specifically around where do you see the government prioritizing internal development of digital competencies, and where do you see the government delegating to the private sector on digital kind of competency? So I think you touched on this at the beginning, but Mohammed has said, could you say a little bit more about where you think that split might fall?
Yeah, yes and no. I should say, if I haven't made it clear, let me make the point one more time that managing this space is very much a team effort. So it's not as though I have the answers or I have the ability to go and dictate the answers to the rest of the federal public service. I say this because I'm very blessed in the federal government to have an entity such as Shared Services Canada, which is sort of, if I'm the policy arm when it comes to technology, Shared Services Canada is very much the operational arm. They're the ones that are providing infrastructure and services to all of our different departments and agencies. And clearly, because of that, they're the ones that are making sure that every public servant has the equipment that I'm using right now, screens, the software that is running on these, the applications that are running on these platforms, the smartphones that we have. So they are the ones primarily that are actually partnering with the private sector for some very significant contracts. We also have a department in PSPC, procurement services, and, well, forgive me, I don't know the spelling, but PSBC, they're
Yeah.
responsible for procurement. They too are the ones that are responsible for putting in place standing offers with vendors and things of that nature. We have the Office of the Controller General that owns policy in this space as well. There are certain players that we need to sit down with to say the way that we've been partnering with the with the private sector has not been ideal. It has followed an old model, and we need to be much more agile in terms of how we partner with the private sector in terms of introducing new technologies moving forward. Um, and then getting back to digital competencies and getting people in the federal government understanding the streams of work that are required and making sure that departments and agencies are upskilling and are attracting and training and retaining people that are experts in a variety of new fields in when it comes to technology will allow us to better understand the that divide. So I think it's going to be a journey. It's an evolution. I don't have a particular split in mind that would be ideal. And again, something like Accelerate Gov, I'd love to hear what other jurisdictions are doing in terms of
Mhm.
managing that. There are many more pratfalls and rules and things that we need to uh, the whole culture around procurement has been challenging, and we're having cause to rethink it. And I think more will be to come there. So I can't really give you a specific answer. I'm sorry, but suffice to say that it is top of mind, and we're going to be getting together with various players in the very near future to try and map a way forward on that.
Dominic, thank you. And thank you so much for, I mean, you've been so generous with your time, but also with giving all your insights there. And I can see we haven't managed to get through quite all of the questions, but there are a couple left on things like quantum computers, on AI infrastructure. I think all of these things are kind of looking ahead to what might be coming down the road. And that is one of I know the session that you're going to be speaking on in particular at Accelerate Gov is around the next steps for government transformation. So I guess my final plea is if you want to hear Dominic's thoughts on those kind of issues, you should definitely come along. But Dominic, did you have any closing thoughts at all? You've covered so much ground. I mean, but was there any final things you would like to say to anybody listening today?
Let me just reiterate that I'm very much looking forward to the Accelerate Gov conference. I think it's going to be a great opportunity, as I said earlier, to meet with colleagues, share best practices, continue the important dialogue on how we can all work together to deliver transformed public services. And I'm very excited to see the collaboration and insights that come from our discussions. So thank you so much today, Siobhan. You've been lovely. This has been a very pleasant and very quick hour.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ollie. You really have made that time go really, really fast. And your passion for what you do comes through. So I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person in a couple of weeks in Ottawa. To the audience, thank you so much again for all your great questions. We've got people saying thank you so much, Dominic, on the chat there as well. They've obviously enjoyed it as well. We will be sending round a link with today's conversation to everybody. So if you didn't have a chance to watch it all or to listen to it all, you'll be able to do that and to share it with colleagues who weren't able to join us live today. And I think we'll also be probably producing an article with some of the key points that we've covered today, and that will come around in a couple of weeks' time. But for me, just last thing to say, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thanks, Dominic.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much. And thanks to everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.